honestly, I didn't know who Fellini was. So I walked into his office, and he looks at me, and he says, Gira di la. Turn around, and that aggravated me. I went, you want to see my teeth? And I pulled up the bell-bottom flare pants and said, you want to see my legs? Helping him out, but I was being really ironic with him. He looked at Liliana Betti, who, if I remember right, she had a cigar. And they were like, she was just like that with her cigar, and they were looking at me. And he said, questo ragazzo è elegante e particolare. He's elegant and particular. I didn't understand that he was relating to me as himself when he had arrived in Rome. And he just looked at me and he said, you're hired. You come back in 2 weeks. I really knew very little about the American film industry. I knew film because I would go watch European films. You have to understand too that Texas it had its beauty, but it was horrible. You know, like it was really rough. There was a lot of racism. When I said I wanted to be an actor, people would laugh. Mexican Americans can't be actors, you know, like you're not gonna do it. My first film, Viva Max in San Antonio, I wound up cast by Jerry Paris himself. And I went to El Tropicana Hotel in San Antonio from college with a beautiful girl that was gonna audition for him. And she was just gorgeous. When I walked into the hotel room with her for the audition, everyone was in the room, you know, and you'd go around the beds and into the chairs and sit down in front of the camera. But I didn't think I was going to audition, and all of a sudden I heard, that face! And I went, oh, look at me. And he said, yes, that face. Are you going to audition? And so when I went to audition, of course I was, you know, and he stopped and he said something very important. He said, in this business, always be yourself. All of a sudden I just started being myself there, and I was cast. I think I was more used to exploit San Antonio and take a local kid that was, you know, nobody, and get a lot of publicity, which I did. I mean, I was front page everywhere. So that was my beginning, and Viva Max was like the last of that series of It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World, where every star in Hollywood was in that movie. Alice Ghostly, Keenan Wynn. I mean, I got to work with Peter Ustinov and Pamela Tiffin. So there I was in Italy working on Viva Max, and it was a whole different world for me, and that I was playing on the Fellini set when it was empty. It's so hard because I think, was it a dream? I had stayed in Italy and lived there a year after Viva Max and all that crew left, and after Jerry Paris said, come back to LA with me and I'll put you under contract. But I didn't want to go under contract to LA. I just hadn't had my fill of Italy yet because I was discovering what my European DNA was, you know, that part of me, and the difference of how we were treated here and how I was treated there. Film stopped in Italy. There was what they said a sciopero, which was strikes, and the film industry crashed, and they went from 67 films to nothing. And there I was, you know, living off of the money that I had kept for myself to live there. And I got a phone call from my Roman agent after about a year, and he said, there's a movie being cast in Rome that we think you would really be good for. And I was just like, I was sick of modeling. I didn't want to be a model. I could feel all my pictures being stapled. I could feel the staples. I was very, now they call it OCD, but in those days it was just extra sensitive. And I mean, when you have hundreds of pictures out there and you feel the staples in all of them, you're going, oh, I don't want to do this. I was supposed to go back, and they were sending me a ticket to go back to Rome and audition for Franco Zeffirelli. And he was doing Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon. He had had a big hit, which was Romeo and Juliet. And I knew that he hired English actors. He liked English actors. But I thought, well, I'll go. And my friend said, I have a phone number. You call this number and go to lunch with Eugene Walter. And, he writes music. So I got to Cinecittà again, and I went in and I sat in a room, and I was sitting there waiting to meet Franco Zeffirelli. And he walked in the room and he walked out. He didn't even say hello. I thought, well, great trip back to Rome. And I remembered that number. So I just picked up the phone and said, I'm leaving this evening, Mr. Walter, but maybe I can have lunch with you. My dear mutual friend with you said that I should call you. And he says, oh, come right over. He had a southern life in Rome, and he knew everyone. Well, it turns out that Eugene Walter would translate most of what was going on in Italy into English, and most of what was going on in English in movie scripts into Italian. So he knew everyone and everything that was going on in Italy. And at lunch, he said, Peter, I think I'm going to make a couple of phone calls for you. So he called Liliana Cavani. And he said, I have this young man for this movie that you're casting that I think would be perfect as Goulot and Pélias in the areas that are going to be Pélias and Mélisande. So she said she'd think about it. So he said, and that she'd think about meeting me. And then he picked up the phone and he said, Mr. Fellini, I have a young man that I think should be who you're looking for. And he had their scripts there. And so Federico said, oh, send him over tomorrow. Send him over tomorrow. So then he picked up the phone and he said, Miss Cavani, Mr. Fellini is very interested in this young man. I mean, this man went all the way to do all of this over lunch. And so she says, oh, I have to have him. I have to have him. Here I am, this Chicano kid from South Texas, from a little town where horses still wander around the streets. But, I was a big Italian movie star and a London model and all of these things. So obviously I was changed. I went back to my agent, Roberto Romani, a wonderful young man in Italy that had his partner Giovanella Di Cosmo in the Agenzia di Cosmo Romani, and they were my agents, right? And they had remembered me after a year, and I had gone back. And so I said, Roberto, call Federico Fellini and make an appointment for me. And he was like, Federico Fellini. I'd go call him and make an appointment. And so he called and he made the appointment. Well, I got to Cinecittà the next day. I, delayed my flight. And there was a line, like a block-long double line of young men waiting to get into the studio. And that's why I was asking I asked if there were big gates, because I remember these big gates and everybody in front of these big gates and double lines. So I just went around all of them and I just knocked on these. I remember them as being wooden doors, and I knocked on them, and the little door opened, and it was this woman, and Liliana Betty. And I said, I'm here, and I'm supposed to meet Federico Fellini. And she looked, and I said, Eugenio Walter sent me. And so she said, oh, Eugenio, Peter, sei tu. It's you, Peter. So, I mean, the gates to to Roma and to Italian film opened, and the doors opened, and I was in front of this desk, and there was Mr. Fellini. So I went up to Fellini and I said, well, you know, I also committed to Liliana Cavani. And he goes, how long does she want you for? Quanto tempo? And I go, ella m'ha detto, no, m'ha detto 2 settimane, 2 weeks, 15 giorni, 15 days. And so he goes, e tu che cosa vuoi fare? Ma voglio fare ogni due. Voglio fare ogni due. It's been 40 years since I spoke Italian, but I want to do both, you know. And he said, so you want to go? Okay, you have 15 days. So that was good. I mean, you know, not everybody gets a 40-week contract with 2 weeks to go work on another movie. So Italy had had no movies made for about 2 years because they were in a crisis. And then I was supposed to star in both of the movies that were pulling it out of the crisis. Working with Fellini on the set was like going into a city because, I mean, he had like 5 or 6 sets. Fellini didn't believe in scripts. And he would just like mimeograph sheets of his ideas and staple them together, and they were for the next day. Federico Fellini was this man that had an image in his head. His angels, his genius, would show him what was supposed to be in the film. And so everything, no matter how extravagant or how ordinary it is, he's watching it in his head. He doesn't need a script. He says, I need 50 pine trees. And then if they deliver 49 and he goes to the set, where's the 50th tree? That's what gets me about the script writing for LA. If you don't have the lead line, and if you don't have, like by page 10, something written that's going to grab the formula, and it's all very formula driven and within the box. And they do tell you, well, you know, I mean, if it's great, it's going to grab them anyway, but you have to really get past the kind of bureaucratic readers that throw it out if you're not perfectly spelled. But Fellini just would mimeograph it and he'd say, è per le produttori. It's for to show the producers something, you know? And that's how he did his movies. And so that's very creative and it's genius, actually. Well, honestly, unless you're a Latino in the United States, you don't get Fellini. You know, unless you're a Latino or of Italian descent, if you have Latin blood in you, you understand how Fellini and life in Italy and life for Latinos is magical realism. There's nothing made up about it. We live that way. You know, the mesquite tree has angels on it. You know, the people are just, if you live in Rome and you're accepted as an Italian beyond the buying food from them at a sidewalk restaurant, but then you get into their homes, it's a magical life. It's a documentary showing exactly how it is. And Americans might not get that because our lifestyles are so different. And if you look through a book and you see these 10 numbers, see? Then, and it says first edition, and if it has the 10 numbers, it means that it's the first publishing, because it can be a first edition, not the first publishing. And that's the one you want to get signed because it can be worth a fortune.
Growing up, he's just always been daddy to me, and I was used to that. But everyone always seemed to know him wherever we go, and they would always say, "Oh, I loved your dad in this film or that film, and he worked with so many cool artists." Or they would say, "I love your dad from Fellini, and is it cool how he got to work with Fellini?" And we didn't really understand that much until this year. We kind of realized like how, I guess, famous he is and how popular he is, and everyone always knew him wherever we went. And this year we're just kind of realizing everything about him.
He has so many friends and a pretty big fan base. Like whenever we would go out just to eat or something, people would be like, "Oh my God, Peter, how have you been?" And it was always so cool to see a bunch of people. It was always a great way to meet new people, just hanging out with Daddy.
But this is the end of a cycle that I've lived here in San Antonio. And I opened up this studio as a little open to the public shop because I had pulled away from the San Antonio community into my private life while my daughters were young. And I came back in and opened up this shop as a way to introduce myself back to my artist friends. And so their original artwork would show here, and I called it Mexi Moxie because I figured, you know, Mexis, which is us, have moxie, and everything was los garrientos or los chorreados or this or that, and I thought, you know, I don't want to name it something that is kind of a self-put down. I think we're fabulous. We're the most fabulous people on earth in so many ways because we're the Mexica, we're the mixture of all people. So we have moxie. So that's why I called it that. As you can see, I'm moving out, so Francois, you too caught the tail end of Mexi Moxie Studios. But these are the only real 3 pieces of my work that I've ever framed because I always kept my work hidden. But these 3 ladies were done in about 1974. And they're my anima figures. This is the goddess. And then, you know, I can't even tell you what's in these pictures. And this place was also called Mexi Moxie, the new Gonzalez Girls Production Studios, because my daughters, well, we're a family that has a lot of sisters in it. And so my daughters are 2 sisters, and they're the young new Gonzalez girls. So up here, behind you here, is a drawing or a painting that my daughters did. Yeah, see if you can pull that, oh yeah, pull it down. And they were very little when they came over and they painted this, which is the new Gonzalez Girls Production Studios. Come here, girls, and show this.
What is it?
Remember when you painted this?
Oh yeah, that was a long time ago.
Such a
I did
fun
that.
summer.
And so we would get here and work together. And the art of acting, well, for me, acting is a very strange, undefinable art because it's such a relative art. Anything is acting, but when I started out acting, I thought I had to act this way or that way. I was very young, 12 or 13, and I realized that I wasn't an actor. What I was, as I started working more, I was a changeling, a chameleon, and I would just become whatever it is that I was doing.
So that's how it changed. I discovered parts of myself that weren't readily accessible to me through a character. And then the character would invest itself in me and express itself. And then when it was over, I didn't even remember what happened. So that to me is the art of acting. Like in painting or coloring, just get out of the way and see what the muse or the genie or whatever you want to call it wants to do through your body or your being. I used to have, like, I worked for Valentino in Italia Vogue, and I had those,